Polaris makes 85 cents of every dollar from things that have nothing to do with snow. The company that built the XLT is now a boat, ATV, and side-by-side company. The Snowmobile is just along for the ride. If you've ridden Polaris your whole life, that number should bother you. Because that number explains the 800 engine disaster, it explains the dying race program, it explains every corner that got cut on machines your generation trusted with your safety. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly when Polaris made the turn away from snowmobiles, what they did to the riders who found out the hard way, and which machines from which years are still worth your money. Stay with me. 1945, Roseau, Minnesota, Edgar Hetton came home from World War II and started fixing equipment, farm machinery, agricultural tools, anything the people in that part of Minnesota needed to keep running. He called the business Hetting Hoist and Derrick. Small operation, 2 men at the start, northern Minnesota near the Canadian border. By 1954, the company had grown enough to rename itself. They chose a name from the Latin for North Star, Polaris, and in 1955, they built their first snowmobile. The snowmobile wasn't elegant, wasn't fast, but in Roseau in the mid-1950s, a machine that could actually move across deep snow had a future that nobody else was chasing yet. Edgar Hetting saw that future clearly. He pushed the company hard. More snowmobile development, more models. Go all in. The investors who'd backed Polaris said no. They liked the steadier farm equipment revenue. So in March of 1960, Hetting organized an expedition across Alaska. Just him and 3 others on Polaris machines. 1,200 miles from Bethel to Fairbanks in 18 days, through some of the worst terrain on the continent. He wanted to prove the point so clearly that nobody could argue with him anymore. He came home. The board was angry about the cost and the distraction. Hetton sold his shares in May 1960 and walked out. He tried to start over in Alaska as a bush pilot. That didn't last. By Christmas 1960, he was in Thief River Falls, 140 miles from Roseau, renting a 30 by 70 foot warehouse with a borrowed $10,000 to start over. On January 2nd, 1961, Polar Manufacturing opened its doors. By 1962, the machines rolling out of that warehouse were called Arctic Cats. Let that sit. The man who believed in snowmobiles more than anyone at Polaris got pushed out by his own investors, and then spent the next 3 decades beating them at their own game. One more thing. While Hetting was building Arctic Cat in Thief River Falls, Polaris had a rough stretch. Nearly went bankrupt in 1964 with a failed front engine sled called the Comet. Survived. Then in the late 1960s, the company was acquired by Textron Inc., the same industrial conglomerate that would eventually buy Arctic Cat in 2017. Textron owned Polaris for over a decade. A management buyout in 1981 freed Polaris from Textron's hands. So Polaris escaped the kind of corporate ownership that Arctic Cat eventually fell into. The histories of these two companies have been reflecting each other for 70 years. After the 1981 buyout, Polaris was running lean and building machines for people who actually use them, and the engineering team was starting to move. Around 1980, Polaris introduced the TXL Indy, the first production snowmobile with IFS independent front suspension. Before that, trail sled front ends were rigid, hit a rut wrong, and the sled deflected whether you wanted it to or not. IFS changed everything. Each ski moved independently. The machine responded to the terrain instead of fighting it. Riders could actually steer, corner, and control speed in ways that had never been possible on the trail. That was the real revolution, not liquid cooling, suspension geometry. By 1983, the Indy platform had grown into a full lineup. The Indy Trail, 432 cubic centimeters and fan-cooled, was the accessible version. The Indy 600, liquid-cooled with a 597 cubic centimeter engine, was the performance model. Same platform philosophy across both. It was amazing. The Indy chassis was designed around interchangeability. A 340, a 440, a 500, a 600, all dropped into essentially the same frame. One dealer in a small town could stock one set of suspension parts and work through half the lineup without calling anyone. That's the kind of engineering respects the customer. Polaris backed it with a factory race program. Every lesson from competition, clutch mapping, suspension geometry, pipe resonance, went directly back into what you could actually buy. By the early 1990s, that formula peaked. The 1993 Polaris Indy XLT Fuji 579 cubic centimeters triple. Snowgoer named it Snowmobile of the Year. 2 years later, the XLT Special with upgraded long-travel suspension won it again. Back to back, same platform, refined. That XLT sold in numbers nobody in this industry had seen. Tens of thousands of units from a single model in a single year. That's what full conviction looks like from a company. That production run is still the standard everything else gets measured against. But Polaris converted from a limited partnership to a public corporation in December 1994. And that's when the math started changing. Public company, NYSE, ticker PII. Now you answer to shareholders. And shareholders don't ask which engine won the Iron Dog. They want the growth story. In the late 1990s, the growth story in power sports wasn't snowmobiles. It was ATVs. The Polaris Sportsman platform sold nationally. Urban riders, farmers, ranchers, a market 10 times the size of snowmobiling. By the early 2000s, ATVs were approaching 40% of total company revenue. The factory race program that had been feeding better trail sleds back to the customer since 1980 quietly lost the internal argument. Yeah, not a big announcement, a pullback, a budget decision. Then in April 2011, Polaris acquired Indian Motorcycle, a brand that had been bankrupt. They spent years rebuilding it. Then the RZR side-by-side became the fastest growing product in the company's history. Then Victory Motorcycles, a brand Polaris had developed since 1998, got discontinued in January 2017. Nearly 20 years of development, done in a press release. Indian was outperforming Victory, and they couldn't justify running both. Rational business logic, but it tells you something important. Polaris will walk away from things when the spreadsheet tells them to, without ceremony. In 2019, they made it official with a rebrand, from Polaris Industries to Polaris Inc., a portfolio company, not a snowmobile company. Later in October 2025, Polaris announced the sale of a majority stake in Indian Motorcycle itself, the brand they'd spent 14 years rebuilding, to a Los Angeles private equity firm called Carolwood LP. Indian had been generating about $478 million a year, roughly 7% of total Polaris revenue. 7%. Polaris sold it. They said it would sharpen strategic focus, which brings us back to snowmobiles. Running somewhere around 15% of a company that just sold its motorcycle brand because it was only contributing 7%. Quick pause. If you felt this coming for years and couldn't put the full picture together, hit the like button. Small channel helps more people find this. Keep watching. The next part is what Polaris hoped would stay buried in forum threads. Nobody fully admits a problem. In the mid-2000s, Polaris began rolling out their clean-fire injection system across the snowmobile lineup. The technology is semi-direct injection, a system where fuel injectors sit inside the transfer ports and spray fuel across the top of the piston during the engine charging cycle. The pitch is cleaner combustion, lower emissions, better throttle response. The reality, well, a mid-range fueling problem that Polaris took years to fully solve. In a two-stroke engine, the RPM range you cruise at, roughly 5,000 to 6,500 RPM, is where the engine spends most of its time. That's trail riding, normal pace. The early 800 clean-fire engines ran lean in that exact range. Too little fuel for the heat being generated, not enough cooling through the fuel charge, not enough lubrication for what the pistons were doing. Under those conditions, pistons started to score. And when a piston scores, it takes the cylinder wall with it. Bore scoring. Once it starts, it doesn't stop. And a two-stroke running a scored bore doesn't give you much notice before it tells you, usually at full pull, usually far from the trailhead. The machines it hit hardest, the Rush, the Switchback, the Pro RMK, the performance-oriented sleds, the ones bought by riders who pushed them hardest. The guys who rode the hardest found the problem first. Repair cost, $2,000 to over $4,000. On machines many buyers were still making payments on. Sure, Polaris issued technical service bulletins. Dealers were told to look for it. ECU reflashes were applied to add more fuel in the mid-range range. In some cases, pistons and cylinders were replaced under warranty. But here's what didn't happen. A proactive public recall, a direct, plain English statement that the clean fire system had a fueling flaw in the cruise RPM range, a clear outreach to owners who'd already paid out of pocket for engine rebuilds. If you were in warranty, If your dealer knew what to look for, if you caught it early, you might get the fix. If the engine had already come apart, that conversation got harder. In 2018, Polaris announced an all-new engine for the 2019 model year. The 850 Patriot, clean sheet design, different bore, different stroke, completely redesigned. The only parts shared with any previous Polaris engine, the spark plugs, 2 sensors, and some fasteners. Polaris said the engineering team had analyzed what caused engine failures across previous platforms and built the 850 to address them directly. They backed it with a standard 4-year warranty. On a snowmobile engine, that's confidence, or at minimum, an acknowledgement that previous engines hadn't earned that kind of guarantee. Their marketing called it performance and innovation. What it also was, a clean break from everything the 800 had become known for. The riders who paid for engine rebuilds on 800 Cleanfire machines didn't get a press conference. They got TSBs and a parts kit, and a lot of them remember that. Drop a comment right now. Did you own an 800 Cleanfire, Rush, Pro RMK, Switchback? Tell me the year and what happened. I want to know how many people in this community dealt with this firsthand. Polaris generated approximately $7.2 billion in revenue in 2024. Snowmobiles represent somewhere around 15% of that total. The brand that built the most famous trail sled in the history of the sport now generates about 1/6 of its income from snowmobiles. RZR and Ranger side-by-sides are the real growth engine. Off-road dominates the portfolio, and we already know Polaris sold off the motorcycle brand they'd spent 14 years rebuilding because it was only 7% of revenue. Snowmobiles are being managed, not grown, managed. You can see it in how they run the market now. The SnowCheck pre-order program means you order months in advance, Polaris manufactures to that demand, and no dealer sits on a lot full of unsold sleds. Clean inventory, controlled production, that's a rational strategy for a smaller market. It's also the strategy of a company that has decided what the ceiling looks like. Compare that to the mid-1990s when tens of thousands of XLTs were coming off the line, and that sled was the reason half the company showed up in the morning. Same name, same city, not the same company. I want to be fair. The people who actually build these machines in Roseau haven't given up. They never did. The AXYS chassis, which debuted on the Russian Switchback for the 2015 model year and expanded to the RMK lineup for 2016, was a genuine engineering advancement. Lighter, stiffer, better rider weight distribution. Riders felt it immediately. The 850 Patriot engine, whatever the business pressure behind its creation, is a more reliable platform than what it replaced. Bore scoring complaints that were endemic with the 800 are a fraction of what they were. The 4-year factory warranty reflects that. The engineers in Roseau are still building the best machine they're allowed to build with the budget they're given. When you're a $7 billion company, a snowmobile division serving a niche demographic in northern North America competes against RZR investment and whatever comes next in the portfolio for every dollar it asks for. The engineers make the case, sometimes they win, but they're not the ones on the investor call. And the people writing those budgets didn't grow up riding Polaris sleds. That gap between the floor in Roseau and the boardroom is the hidden problem. If you're looking at used Polaris machines, here's exactly what I do. The undervalued sweet spot right now is the 2003 to 2010 Liberty Engine 600 cubic centimeter trail sleds. These are Polaris's own developed 2-stroke twin, carbureted or with conventional oil injection. Pre-Cleanfire, pre-lean mid-range problem. The aftermarket still covers them well, and any competent 2-stroke shop can work through one. The XLT era machines, 1993 to 1997, are still the gold standard and awesome. Clean running examples are trading in the $2,000 to $3,500 range, depending on region and condition. You already know these machines. The point here is that the Liberty era 600s that came after are often overlooked and priced accordingly. Please avoid any 800 Cleanfire machine from approximately 2007 through 2014. Rush, Switchback, Pro RMK, unless the seller can verify 3 specific things. 1. An ECU reflash was performed by a dealer addressing the mid-range fueling, asked for the service record. 2. Cold compression test. Both cylinders, minimum 120 psi each, within 10% of each other. Do this yourself. Don't trust a warm engine test. 3. Documented service history showing the engine was inspected for scoring. If all 3 aren't verifiable, walk away. An 800 Cleanfire that's been properly addressed is a usable machine. One that hasn't been looked at is a gamble with a known failure mode. and a two-stroke bore-scored engine won't always warn you before it lets go. If you own an 800 Cleanfire right now, get a bore scope inspection done before next season. You want someone looking at the actual cylinder walls, especially near the transfer port area. A shop with the equipment will charge around $100 to $150 for the inspection. Find out on the ground, not on the trail. For 850 Patriot machines from 2019 onward, you're in a better reliability position. Used examples from that era are in the $11,000 to $14,000 range, depending on miles and specs. Still run the compression test, good habit on any two-stroke, regardless of platform. Edgar Hetton started this company in 1945 with farm equipment and a vision. He believed in snowmobiles when the investors didn't, got pushed out for it, drove 1,000 miles across Alaska to prove his point, came home to an angry board and an exit, built Arctic Cat instead. The company that pushed him out was sold to Textron in the late 1960s. A management buyout freed it in 1981. Then it became a public company. Then it became an ATV company, then a motorcycle company, then a side-by-side company, then it sold the motorcycle brand. And somewhere in there, the snowmobiles became 15%. The riders who paid the real price for that drift were the guys who bought into the 800 Cleanfire. The performance-oriented riders who trusted the brand most, pushed hardest, and found the lean mid-range problem at 30 miles from the trailhead. That's what happens to a product line when it stops being the reason the company exists. Polaris isn't going anywhere. They're too large and too diversified to disappear. The 850 Patriot is a genuinely better engine. The engineers in Rousseau are still fighting for every dollar. The machines are still worth riding. But the snowmobile division of a $7 billion company is competing against categories that are growing faster. That's just math, guys. And if the people writing those checks ever decide that 15% is also 14, and then 12, and then a brand licensing arrangement, the riders who've been loyal the longest will be the last ones the spreadsheet accounts for. Edgar Hetton knew that feeling. He lived it. That's the hidden problem nobody talks about. It was never just the engine. 2 questions. Leave both in the comments. 1. What's your best Polaris memory? Year, machine, trail, the ride you still think about. 2. Did the 850 Patriot earn Polaris your trust back after the 800 era? Or is that relationship done? If this is the kind of honest conversation you've been looking for, hit subscribe. Small channel. Every subscriber matters to me personally. Check out the next video right here.